Right. So this is what we had so far, and it's not bad actually. You could probably get away with this in some contexts if it's cameras moving around or there's lots of smoke covering things up. Like we can't really tell necessarily that there's, all this like cracking between the meshes here. So when we look at this, we can obviously see cracks. Metal would never look like this. If it's motion blurred and flying by, well, then you'd never know. It would just be like this and be like, but I can't tell. But in many cases, you will be able to tell. So let's keep going with this for now. Although I do like a lot of what's happening here with like, here's the chairs and the piece of the helicopter wrapped around it. That's really cool. What we can do is do this denting and bending that we've been talking about though. And in order to do that, we will use these pieces, these cells, these Voronoi pieces, as an influence on an unbroken piece of geometry. Meaning, we'll basically take the original unfractured stuff from way back up here in prefracture land, and we looked at this. Obviously, this is an unbroken piece of geometry. Like, let's say this. It's smooth, it's flat, or whatever you want to say. There's no cracks on it. But we can still bend it. We're just going to use these underlying, the fractured pieces as an influence on them. So, let me show you what I mean. What we will lose in the process is we won't be able to have arbitrary rips happening wherever we want. We won't have that as much. But by artistically controlling where the rips happen ourselves, we'll still be able to have it look like it's doing it. And in fact, it will be more artistically directed anyway, which is usually a good thing. So it's kind of win-win. So let's do it. So let's set up these, what I'll call deformable surfaces. What we'll need straight off the bat is, again, the fact that this will not be allowed to be broken. We can't have these hard constraints break in the sim, because if I'm going to have this unbroken piece here, and let's say, just so I can really look at it. If I'm going to have this thing here be driven by something else, I can't have some Voronoi pieces going this way and some Voronoi pieces going this way. They'll be moving away from each other, and then this thing, which is like trying to be magnetized to those things, it's being deformed by them, it's going to move in two separate directions. So we can't have that. So we do need to at least ensure that this can't break apart anymore. But like I said, we can arbitrarily crack it ourselves, which we actually are going to do in a couple of chapters from now. But for now, we're going to keep it all as one piece. But rest assured, we will circle back and allow it to break apart. So anyway, we need to know the original, what the original surfaces are. So here we are, kind of all the way back up here where I said we never have to come back to again. And of course, here we are back to it again. Let's make a wrangle. I just want to have like an easy ID. I'm just going to call it original or rig IDs. I just want to have like an easy thing to say numerically, like this was the original surface, and we can identify it by some integer, and this will all come together. But for now, this should be easy enough to figure out. Boom, easy, done. Cat rig IDs. Each surface knows who he was. Now that number will propagate down through the fracture and everything else. So the fractures will know, and this is the reason why we're doing it, the fractures will know where they originally came from. So another thing we want is, let's set another property. We want to know, for this like body here, we want to say like, oh, this is going to be one of, and this is the earlier properties, not the later properties that we did down here, which I guess we could netbox up if we wanted to. We're going to want to know up there, oops, is this one of those guys that's deformable? Because we're going to do something a little bit different during the fracture part, if it is. So we'll say cat deformable equals 1. And I made it an integer because it's like a switch. It's just saying, yes, you are deformable. So to repeat what we're doing so far, we basically just said what the original IDs were of the unbroken surfaces. The broken pieces will know who their original unbroken surfaces are, and that's how we will match them up again later. So after the simulation, we'll be able to say, okay, now go back, take the original one, and move it based on the broken one. And also, we said that this is deformable, and all the other ones will get a deformable equals 0 by default. And we can have in our fracturing thing here, we can say, and let's actually find that one. So remember when we did this before? And now we're actually going to wait. But I was going to say, remember when we did this before with the $F for the particular iteration that we were on? We could turn this thing back on, and let's find the actual body. This one is fine, for example, because we know that this is one of the ones. And so sure enough, if I go here and I look, and I can see cat deformable is 1. Cool. So if we know it's 1, I just need to fracture it slightly differently. This scatter thing here, it's not bad. When you scatter by default, it'll look like this. And when we Voronoi fracture, we don't really know what we're going to get. It's just the points are could be clumped together or not. One of the nice things about scatter is that you can have it relax them. And the more you relax them, the more spread apart they'll be, as you can see here. This roughness can actually be nice sometimes. In our case, though, because this is never actually going to, now that we're making a deformable surface that doesn't break apart, the more evenly spaced we can get, the better. That way, it all kind of behaves the same. It wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but I think that this makes more sense for simulation to have a lot of similar pieces under the hood that are all working together as little small sections of a whole. I think you'll see what I mean. So all we need to do here is say, hey, if, and this is kind of like before, where I'm going to look back at the for loop, the beginning of it, and I'm going to say, hey, get primitive 0, which is the only primitive that comes in per iteration, get the cat deformable attribute. If it's 1, so it's going to return 0 or 1. So if it's 1, then do X, otherwise do Y. And X in our case is going to be return 100, otherwise return the 10 we've been using. So now relaxed iterations is 100 whenever it detects that a deformable piece is coming in. So if I come back down here and I choose something else, so like here's a window, right? The window is not set to be deformable. So you'll see here it's returning 10. And that's just what the if statements here do in HScript. They have the conditional here, and this is its own conditional. I don't even have to say does it equal 0 or does it equal 1, because it's already returning 0 or 1. If it's true, do this. If it's not, do this. Cool. So that's pretty simple for that. And we'll need to have it save it into our file cache thing here, and I guess I should turn this back off. So now I am going to up the version of this to save it. Uh-oh. I left the visualize thing on here. Oopsies. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it again. Okay, much better. Doesn't look like a weird cupcake confetti anymore. Cool. So there it is, back to normal. And now we're going to have to slide on down here to the process constraints area. Or maybe even more interestingly, let's look at our pieces here. Right before that they turn into the constraints, we'll say, let's take a look at the cat deformable kind of business. Let's see, did this even propagate down? We should make sure. Cat deformable equals 1. Looks like it did. So as we know, we set the body before to be deformable, and there it is. Looking in here, they know they have this catarig IDs looking back to the original pieces that they came from. So if I just chose one at random, let's say 62 seems to be popular. I'll say, how about cat orig IDs equals 62? And there you go. So it's this thing. So all of these pieces know they come from 62. And what was 62? Well, we should be able to take the same thing and look back at the pre-fractured, and we'll get the unbroken version. And there it is. So again, we've got the unbroken and the broken. As the broken one, well, later on, we're going to set up a relationship between these two that when these move, this will move with it. But of course, for that reason, we can't have these flying out all over the place, or else this will stretch to infinity, which again, sound like a broken record, is why we can't have it actually break apart. But we can instead do is something, we'll be able to art direct fractures before this comes to this. But for now, what we want to do is we want to implement the denting characteristic, which is this will start off all glued together. When it crashes into something, it will quickly switch over to the hard constraint type that we've seen, where it looks all bendy and whatnot. And then once it achieves some kind of dent, it will switch back to being glue, thus preserving the dent. And I think that's going to look pretty cool. So we need to set that up down here in process constraints land.